Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another video. The SBC has outlined a level 5 out of 5 high risk for the Ohio and mid-Mississippi River valleys today. This was a bit of a surprising move. They pulled the trigger on this last night, and it was a little bit of a shock to me, and still is. But nonetheless, the SBC feels they have enough evidence to outline a level 5 out of 5 high risk in the pink shaded region here, surrounded by a level 4 out of 5 moderate risk that extends up into southern Indiana, southern Illinois, down through much of central Arkansas, far northern Louisiana, into northwest Mississippi, and west central Tennessee and Kentucky. Let's zoom in a little bit here and show you who is in and who is out. Starting with the northern portions of the high risk here, that will include places like Poplar Bluff, Paducah, Mayfield, down toward Dyersburg, Tennessee, Paragould, Jonesboro, Arkansas, along with Memphis Metro, the entire Memphis Metro in the high risk today. And so folks in Memphis should be on high alert for today. And then places like Pine Bluff and Monticello, Arkansas, are under the gun for that level 5 out of 5 high risk, but a very widespread risk for today. I'll zoom out just a tad, with large marginal and slight risks extending up into the Great Lakes regions, down into central Texas, places like Milwaukee, Detroit, Cleveland in that slight risk area. And then the enhanced risk level 3 out of 5 includes places like Chicago, Indianapolis, down toward Dallas-Fort Worth, and Abilene, Texas, Shreveport in that as well, St. Louis, in that level 3 out of 5 enhanced risk. So if you are in any of the colors today, especially the orange, red, and particularly the pink colors today, there is a threat for significant, highly significant severe weather. And the main reason for the high risk upgrade was evidence that the SPC felt was there for a significant tornado outbreak. The SPC has included a 30% hatched area in the high risk area, surrounded by large 10 and 15% hatched areas as well. So the significant tornado threat will extend up into central Illinois, northern Indiana, western Ohio, including Columbus, Cincinnati, Fort Wayne, Indianapolis, Springfield, Illinois, St. Louis, all the way down toward Shreveport, 15% hatched area, Louisville, Evansville, and toward Greenville, Mississippi. And then the 30% hatched area will include places like Poplar Bluff, Mayfield, Paducah, down toward Memphis, and Jonesboro, Arkansas. So widespread risk for significant long-track tornadoes, possibly the threat for some high-end tornadoes today, although there are a lot of flies in the ointment with the setup for today. And so we'll go over those in just a second. But overall, the SPC believes that there is a fairly elevated risk for significant long-track tornadoes in today's event. Significant damaging winds are also a distinct possibility from all the way from the Great Lakes states, southern Michigan, southward, all the way through the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys, and some of those same places that we mentioned. So significant straight line damaging winds are a threat for today, as is large hail. Significant large hail, 2 to 3 plus inch in diameter hailstones up from northern Indiana, western Ohio, southward through parts of southeast Oklahoma and north Texas, including the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex there. So extensive risk for large to very large hail. That large hail threat will increase with southwest extent here back toward the kind of southwest portions of the risk area, where the low-level shear is a bit on the weaker side. Now, there are several days of severe risks following today's threat. We have a slight risk out for tomorrow from the East Coast all the way down into Texas with an all hazards threat there. And then day 3, slight risk continues from the Midwest down into southwest Texas. And then multiple days on the day 4 through 8 outlook there. 30% region, enhanced risk equivalent region across northern Missouri, southern Arkansas, northern Louisiana, southern Arkansas into Mississippi on day 4, Saturday. And then day 5, that continues into the southeast, Georgia, Alabama, Florida Panhandle, and then we look to be able to have a little bit of a break there going after that. But I want to focus on today's threat in this video because it looks to be quite elevated. Now, before we dive in, I want to just profess to all of you out there that the SPC has my utmost respect. They are the smartest people in the business, and their forecasts should be treated as the official forecast and the number one source that you should go to for your severe weather forecasting needs. I'm going to give you my opinion in this video. Spoiler alert, it's going to tend to disagree with this forecast a little bit, but that is my opinion. We're going to go through, as we always do, the data in a fairly objective manner, but I'm going to give you my opinion on the overall setup. And I've got to be honest, I'm a little bit puzzled with this upgrade to high risk, I have to admit. But we're going to go through the reasons why I say that. But just know that the SPC forecast should be taken as the official forecast. And so I'm just going to give you my opinion, but the SPC forecast should be number one, and you should follow all their guidelines for the overall event that they outline in their outlook. So just with that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive in here. Let's go ahead and show you what we have going on right now. This is the visible satellite imagery. You can see a very abundant convection all the way from the Midwest down into the southern plains, continuing from last night. Yesterday was a little bit of a dud during the daytime. Storms just didn't quite fire and sustain themselves in Oklahoma, but after dark, about 3 a.m. or so, we saw another round start to develop along the eastward shifting cold front, and that is all of this convection here. We've seen a lot of convection here from the Midwest states, southern Great Lakes, all the way down in a band from kind of northern Illinois all the way down into North Texas this morning. This is going to continue to shift off to the east today and may end up being our main round of storms with this severe weather setup for today. We'll go over why that is in just a second, but you can see a fairly sort of messy storm mode at this point, but this will pose a severe weather risk as we go forward into the morning and early afternoon hours. Damaging winds, isolated large hail with any more robust embedded supercells, and a few tornadoes are possible with this early activity before things kind of ramp up going into the afternoon hours today. So this is what we have going on at 500 millibars today. Just a big, very widespread trough here out across the kind of the eastern 2/3 of the country, digging down into western Mexico there. Big trough, a little bit of a shortwave back in here across the desert southwest. But our main shortwave for today's threat, at least the northern portions of today's threat, is this one right in here. We've seen a little bit of intensification of the upper level flow since yesterday with this little shortwave. The shortwave has developed here over the last day or so. We have a nice strong jet streak associated with that flow. Now, in the initial upgrade to high risk last night, the outlook stated that this jet streak was going to be moving very rapidly through the flow, and that would be one of the reasons why this setup would be very favorable for a tornado outbreak. And that is due to some of the recent research from folks like Chris Broyles at the SPC, showing that faster moving jet streaks tend to be much more favorable for significant tornado outbreaks than slower moving jet streaks. And this jet streak is certainly going to be moving very quickly. By midday or so, this jet streak already going to be off up toward the upper Midwest into Great Lakes region. But that leaves us a problem for the actual high risk area. The track of this jet streak is going to be moving off to the northeast, and we'll break this down as we look at the models in just a second as far as the progression goes. But that's going to leave this high-risk area in a bit of a void as far as large-scale forcing for ascent goes. The track of this jet streak going to be off to the northeast, away from this region, leaving this region in just kind of a nebulous area of large-scale forcing for ascent. We're also not going to see a lot of height falls during the day. These height contours here, we've talked about height falls before. It's basically when you're at a location and you have a trough coming in, that trough moves across your location, you're going to see height falls. The geopotential height is going to decrease at 500 millibars or 300 millibars or wherever as you go through the day at that location. Well, our heights are going to remain fairly neutral given that this is going to eject off to the northeast away from this region. So it looks like our forcing for ascent is going to be fairly minimal, and that leads to some very strong questions over the degree of prefrontal storm development, which makes me think that this actual line of storms that's ongoing now is going to be our main band of storms, and it's already in a pretty messy storm mode right now. And to look at some soundings here, we'll skip ahead to some soundings here. There's a little bit of a capping inversion in place out here across Little Rock, at right now 12Z up toward central Illinois. We're kind of north of the front down here at Springfield, Missouri. Very minimal capping here at this point, very limited capping. Would expect that to erode as we get stronger surface heating later on in the day, but we don't really have a forcing mechanism out here across these areas. So as the cap erodes during the day, as we get some surface heating, continued warm moist advection, that cap will probably start to erode a little bit. Once that happens, we already are going to have a line of storms, perhaps maybe a broken band of storms at best. And that's just going to allow even more storms to develop. Even though we don't have strong synoptic scale forcing for ascent, once the cap erodes, it's already fairly weak. Once it erodes, that's just going to allow for more and more storm development along the line, with still nebulous forcing in the open warm sector to perhaps keep development in the open warm sector at bay, which would be your favorite area for significant tornadic supercells. So to me, this just seems like a setup in which we're just going to see this line of storms just fill in and become more of a line, which would mean more of a damaging wind threat and a shorter track, more spin-up tornado risk. Even though we do have very strong kinematics in place here, just look at these photographs here, very strong curvature in the low levels of the atmosphere, very strong low-level jet there, 60 plus knots of flow in the low levels. Same thing up here at Illinois, extremely impressive low-level shear values at this point. But overall, I just am number one, skeptical of the degree of open warm sector convection, which would be more of your supercell convection, discrete supercell convection, which would lead to more of your significant tornado risk. And I think we're just going to see a very messy storm mode. I don't think the storm mode is going to cooperate today, which is why I was very surprised to see this upgrade to high risk, because we still have quite a few questions over storm mode. And it's becoming a little bit clearer now that storm mode may be an issue with this setup, leading to much more of a damaging wind risk and an embedded tornado risk rather than your significant discrete supercell, long track, strong tornado risk. So that's why I've been a little bit puzzled with this upgrade. Again, the SPC, the best in the business, they know what they're doing. This is just my opinion on the overall setup. I just don't really understand some of the logic here with this upgrade. I just have to be honest with you guys. But again, SPC, they're the best in the business, and their forecast should be taken with the most respect compared to any other person's forecast, including my own. So that's what we have going on. Those are some of my initial thoughts. We'll go through the actual progression of today's event as we go through some model data here in just a second. But there's our trough. No doubt, no question, though, that it is a very potent trough. Strong, 120 knots or so of flow there, 130 knots or so of flow within that jet streak. Again, going to continue to move off to the northeast today. So that's going to lead to a lot stronger forcing up to the north as well, which is going to perhaps really ensure more of a line up to the north out across these areas like Illinois into Indiana, southern Wisconsin, southern Michigan, given very strong forcing there. Given the strong flow here within this trough, the surface low development has been very rapid. Very strong surface low here, getting down toward that 990 millibar mark. Strong gradient winds here, very tight pressure gradient out to the east of this surface low. But this surface low is associated with a cold front back here to the west, along which the convection is developing. That line has developed upon. So that cold front going to be the main initiating boundary to keep this line of storms going through the day today. Up to the north, you see here the line continues kind of away from the overall cold front. Let's go ahead and take a look at some surface data here to try to pinpoint where our frontal zones exactly are. We'll start here with let's start off with our northern sector up here. So our surface low looks like somewhere in this vicinity here, maybe eastern Nebraska into Iowa. It's kind of where those winds are kind of shifting around in a counterclockwise direction. So would say our surface low somewhere there in far eastern Nebraska. Perhaps that kind of jives with where the SPC mesoanalysis has it analyzed at this point. So the surface low somewhere in there. Cold front stretching down to the south through a pretty well-defined wind shift, more westerly winds here across Kansas into Nebraska, more southerly flow out across Missouri. So looks to me that our cold front is somewhere in here, maybe even some initial occlusion of this front, as we don't really see a strong temperature gradient in here. So maybe some initial occlusion of this front. Down to the south, we have a little bit of stronger cold front down through here, through eastern Oklahoma, and that's going to be our main initiating boundary. The low is probably going to continue to occlude as it moves off to the northeast today with the ejection of the shortwave. And then our warm front looks to be somewhere in here, 70s temperatures down in here across central Missouri into Illinois, dew points in the 60s down in here with more 50s and 40s off to the north. So our warm front looks to be somewhere in this vicinity as we stand right now. I'm recording this just before 9 a.m. Central Daylight Time. So our warm front maybe somewhere up in here. It's a little bit difficult to pinpoint, just kind of eyeballing it but looks to be somewhere in there. So most of the convection off here to the north, as we saw on our mosaic radar this morning, this convection up in here looks to be more so of an elevated nature at this point. Northern Missouri northward into Illinois, up here across Indiana and Ohio, this looks to be more elevated at this point. This would have more of a large hail risk, maybe a damaging wind gust if that can penetrate through the surface stable layer. We saw that at Lincoln, Illinois earlier on the sounding, that area north of the front. So we had this kind of inversion here in the low levels. So most of that instability is elevated, meaning more of kind of a large hail threat with that activity going in through the morning hours today. The warm front should lift a little bit here going into the afternoon. So there's our surface low and frontal zones. So where this warm front is going to set up is going to be the northern demarcation of our robust severe threat for today. Would expect that it will lift off to the north a little bit with the northeastward ejection of the surface low. So that would put places like eastern Iowa, northern Illinois, northern Indiana, and maybe even southern Michigan in the threat for later on, kind of somewhere in here as the low kind of ejects off to the northeast. So that is kind of the northern demarcation of the robust severe threat for today. Let's go down to the south a little bit toward our mid-south sector here. So that cold front back to the west, back in here. Across parts of North Texas into eastern Oklahoma. Again, that will continue to shift off to the east today. Eventually, probably will actually stall, given that it's going to be a little bit more removed from the actual surface low. The surface low is going to continue to eject off to the northeast. That will mean probably a slowing in the motion of the cold front. It may even start to retreat as more of a warm front going into the afternoon today and kind of stall across these areas. And that's going to give us something I should mention as well. It's going to give us a very robust rainfall and flash flooding threat over the next several days. This is today's risk for heavy rainfall and flash flooding. Level 3 out of 4 moderate risk from eastern Arkansas into northwest Mississippi, western Tennessee, the Missouri Boot Heel, western Kentucky, far southern Illinois, and southern Indiana. Then we have a high risk of flash flooding there right along the northeast Arkansas, western Tennessee, western Kentucky corridor with a moderate risk surrounding that, high risk level 4 out of 4. And then day 3, a continued moderate risk there, North Texas into eastern Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois. Moderate risk continues on day 4, Saturday, and then we kind of see things trail off on Sunday. But forecast rainfall amounts over the next 7 days, bullseyed right there in that area near the Missouri Boot Heel, northeast Arkansas, western Tennessee, Kentucky, southern Illinois. Amounts above 15 inches may fall of rainfall there over the next several days, leading to some life-threatening, perhaps catastrophic flash flooding. So that is going to be all due to this front kind of stalling out a little bit as it kind of loses support from the surface low, and we just are left with kind of broad southwesterly flow aloft to help those storms. The front just kind of sit here over the next several days and just train with storms along it. So catastrophic flash flooding and excessive rainfall likely here as that front stalls. But this front overall going to be the main initiating boundary and continuation boundary, if you will, for the line later on today. Our atmosphere, very moist here. Moist dew points here up into the 60s, mid to upper 60s out across a broad swath ahead of the cold front down here into Texas. 70s dew points down to the south across East Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, upper 60s dew points off to the north across Arkansas into northern Mississippi, western Tennessee. Those will probably continue to shift off to the north a little bit with the northward advance of the warm front. So we should have a fairly broad warm sector in play for these areas. But again, the question is, and it's a big question in my opinion, are we really going to see any prefrontal storm development at all? And I just don't really buy that, given the lack of overall forcing in the warm sector. It's going to be mostly this line that once the cap breaks and erodes fully, that cold front, we're going to have a lot of additional updrafts going up along the ongoing line here within the high-risk area to create more of a just messy storm mode overall. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at some model data here. We'll go ahead and fast forward to our 12Z NAM. It should be just coming out for us today. So here is the 500 millibar chart right now as initialized on the NAM. Here is that jet streak and shortwave right in there across the Central Plains. So what we were talking about before, the track of this shortwave is going to lend a lot of uncertainty and really, I think, is going to lend just a very minimal forcing to the overall area of interest in this setup. And this was cited as a reason for the potential tornado outbreak in last night's outlook and upgrade to high risk was the fast translation of the jet streak. and the fact that it would be in the right entrance region of the jet streak. If you recall our 4-quadrant model, if you were to split up our jet streak into 4 quadrants, you have your exit regions here out ahead of the axis, your entrance regions out here behind the axis. Your right entrance region and left exit regions are your favorite areas for upward motion. So most of our events are in the exit region, but some of our events can occur in the right entrance region. Well, if we go out in time here and watch where this jet streak kind of goes, here we are at 18Z today. So this is at 1 p.m. I'm going to outline our jet streak, and I'm going to be a little bit generous here even as well. So there's our jet streak right in there. And if we were to split this up into our quadrants, notice that our right entrance region is really not even close to our high risk area, which is why I was quite puzzled with the upgrade last night and into this morning, is we're not really even going to be in the right entrance region of this jet streak. The jet streak's position is, the jet streak overall does not really seem that it's going to impact the overall high risk area really in any capacity. We go forward in time, that jet streak just continues to shift off to the north away from the region of interest. A slightly stronger flow does develop here, but I have a suspicion that might be just convectively induced here. So if we were to say that this is kind of just the southern demarcation of our belt of stronger flow, you'll notice we're not even in our area of interest there. The high risk area is not even close to where the jet streak is. So that's why I'm quite puzzled at this upgrade. And we're also, as a result of the track of the jet streak, not going to see a lot of height falls over the warm sector here. So keep your eye on these height contours, these solid black lines here. We would expect these if we were going to see height falls across this region. And remember, our high risk is kind of right in this vicinity here. So if we were going to see height falls here across this area, we would see these height contours kind of moving off to the east, passing by these areas with time. So, but if you watch, we're not really going to see much change in that regard at all through the day. Those height contours stay pretty much set in their same places, which means fairly neutral height falls. We do see some kind of eastward advance of those height contours, but again, I think that may be due to all this convection here, and this may be some convective feedback. So this may not be all that accurate about what's going on in the background environment. So overall, our height falls seem to be fairly neutral across this area later on today, which makes me think that we're just not going to have enough forcing over the open warm sector to really initiate robust discrete supercells out ahead of this line. That makes me think the line is going to be the main round of storms, and then that means once we get destabilization, that cold front will be able to force more and more storms along it to kind of fill in that line and make for more of a messy linear storm mode, meaning more of a damaging wind and embedded tornado risk rather than a significant supercell tornado risk. So, again, I keep saying this, but I'm just a little bit shocked at the upgrade, given some of these reasons. And I'll keep saying this as well. The SPC's forecast is number one. That should be the main source of info you use for your severe weather forecasting needs. But I'm definitely a little puzzled by this one. Would love to see some additional explanation on this, and we'll hopefully some additional investigation after the event kind of takes place to see what happens and how it progresses will be an interesting thing to do here. So zooming back out, that's my concerns here over the actual high risk area. Off to the north, forcing is going to be a lot stronger. So I think by early afternoon or so, we're going to see probably a lot of storms develop here near the northern portions of that warm front, perhaps areas to the north of the warm front. So perhaps elevated convection off to the north here, more of a large hail risk. It's going to depend on where that warm front sets up. But anything along and south of the warm front will have the ability to be surface-based, having that risk for mostly damaging winds, given the forcing, and tornadoes, perhaps one or two strong tornadoes as well, with any surface-based convection up there. Through the day, the trough continues to move off to the north, and we just maintain this broad southwesterly flow pattern into that mid-south area and the Arklatex region going into the afternoon and evening hours today, before our next trough kind of makes its way into the southern U.S. for our upcoming several-day stretch. All right, down at the surface, let's take a look at the actual surface pattern here. So the NAM has initialized here our surface low there in eastern Nebraska, perhaps even farther south there, maybe two different centers there, kind of the Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa confluence area. We go forward in time. That low is expected to eject off to the north. Certainly looks to be some occlusion ongoing with this low. Occluded front down through here. Cold front kind of down through this vicinity as well. where all of that convection will be ongoing. And the NAM definitely has a fairly aggressive northward push of the warm front there. It looks to be kind of by 21Z, which is 4 p.m. Central, right on the Illinois border with Wisconsin, Illinois-Wisconsin border, northern Indiana, central to north central Ohio, and areas southward. So that's going to lead to a lot of folks in the actual warm sector here with surface-based convection possible. Again, with northward extent, I think we're going to see a very good chance for a lot of convection to develop. So a more messy storm mode north, and for some of the reasons we've discussed so far as well, a fairly messy storm mode south as the band just kind of continues off along the cold front to the east. Going into the evening, that low just continues to move off to the north and push things off, and you see that frontal zone kind of stalls out here across the mid-south into the southern plains for the next several days, and that's going to be our main focus for the next several days of our severe threat there across these regions. So here's our moisture dew point values. With 60s dew point line kind of demarcating where that warm front is. You see rapid northward advance of the warm front with the northward kind of northeastward advance of the surface low. That warm front gets pulled northward pretty efficiently, and anyone kind of in those 60s dew points will continue to move to be in the warm sector here. So you see the model just kind of eats away at these dew points. That's all that convection along the frontal zone. That leads me to believe that there's just a lot of convection here along this frontal zone, eating away at these dew points with very little in the way of open warm sector convection. We'll look at some cams here in a second to get that idea of how much warm sector convection there will be. But let's zoom in here to our southern sector. So you see here that front just continues to surge off to the east going into the day today. So it actually looks like perhaps that the band of convection may actually outrun the frontal zone here. So it may actually go out ahead of the frontal zone here with the front just hanging back to the west a little bit, but still the point remains. It should be mostly maybe a broken band of storms out here along or ahead of the front. And then once that cap erodes fully, we should see more storms develop within that band to kind of fill things in, which makes me think it's going to be more so of a linear kind of messy storm mode with today's setup. And you see that front kind of surges off to the east before stalling going into tomorrow. So definitely an interesting progression here across these areas. Let's go ahead and take some soundings here from across the warm sector. We'll take one up here maybe in Illinois, one down here in the Missouri boot heel, maybe one down here as well into Arkansas. We'll go kind of east central Arkansas there, east of Little Rock, and then one down here in the Arklatex, where storms are also expected to develop along that frontal zone. So up here in northern Illinois, a lot of convection up here, so it might be difficult to pinpoint a clean sounding. Let me try to get a clean sounding up here from the northern portions of the risk area. Kinematics certainly not going to be an issue with this setup. There we go. NAM has pretty robust instability, surprisingly. I'm a little bit surprised at that. Let me just quickly take a look at our satellite imagery. A lot of cloud cover here with this band moving in, so this makes me think we might be a little bit overdone with the instability. Probably a lot of cloud cover here as these storms kind of spread off to the east with time going into late morning and afternoon hours. So this instability might be overdone here off to in northern portions of the risk on this NAM run. But nonetheless, we should have enough instability to support robust storms in that open warm sector. 77 over 66 at the surface. We get those mid to upper 60s dew points up there nicely with a pretty intense low-level wind profile. Strong low-level jet, 440 meters square per second squared effective storm relative helicity, strongly curved photographs. Would be an environment favorable for all severe hazards, but I think mostly damaging winds and tornadoes. Perhaps an embedded strong tornado or two, but convection may tend to be messy. Down here to the south, much of the same robust instability across this corridor. NAM showing up over 3,000 joules per kilogram. That might be a little bit overdone, maybe 2,000 to 2,500. Out here, this one is in the Missouri boot heel vicinity, so in that northern portion of the high risk. 21Z, 4 p.m., robust instability, 85 over 67 here. So we get, actually those spreads get kind of high, interestingly enough, with some clearing out ahead of the ongoing complex. But here we go, strong low-level shear. Winds are a little bit veered out ahead of the front, south-southwesterly winds leading to maybe not quite as much low-level shear as was once modeled. So that is some interesting development there. If your lowest kilometer or so fairly actually straight here across these regions, which is interesting. Still plenty of speed shear, plenty of curvature in the lowest couple kilometers to support that tornado risk, and significant tornado risk at that. But that lowest kilometer or so, perhaps a little bit more in the straight line kind of hodograph segment there. So that is interesting to note. But still, plenty of low-level and deep layer shear to support organized convection. Strong instability should be able to support the continuation of updrafts within the ongoing complex, and then additional development later on along that complex going into the afternoon. Instability continues to increase with southern extent. This is across east central Arkansas. Again, I think this is a little bit overdone, but still robust instability. 87 over 70, very moist, warm, low levels there with strong low-level shear to support that all-hazards threat. And then things kind of back off as we go down into Texas here. This is in the northeast Texas vicinity. A little bit more limited low-level shear profiles, a little bit of backing in the low levels of the atmosphere, perhaps a little bit of a shortwave passage earlier on, or just some wonkiness in the overall wind profiles there with a little bit of backing in the mid-levels. Still plenty of low-level and deep layer shear to support robust severe storms out across that corridor. So we will have a very broad, what is certain is that we'll have a very broad swath of folks here from the upper Midwest, southern Great Lakes, all the way down into the southern plains that will be in a very broad warm sector with very strong kinematics, strong low-level shear, strong deep layer shear to support organized convection over a broad swath. Questions here, though, remain about the storm mode, and I just don't believe that we're going to see a very discrete supercell mode really anywhere. Could we see a few supercells develop ahead of the line, just right ahead of the line? Sure. But well out into the open warm sector here. So, for example, your band is out here across western Arkansas, southern Missouri, and you get convective development out here in northern Mississippi, western Kentucky, and Tennessee. I think that's a little bit unlikely given some of the lack of overall forcing across this region going into the afternoon hours today. Let's take a look at some cams here. Very interested to see what the cams have to say with this setup today. So this is the 12Z HER, has that line of convection initialized pretty well, the convection across the upper Midwest down into the Great Lakes region there. And here we go off to the east. So the HER does have the band kind of devolving a little bit, but you see most of the convection tries to just develop along that band. Very, very limited open warm sector convection. Some attempts maybe up here into Indiana and Ohio, So I'll say this, if we do get any prefrontal supercells, those would have the greatest chance of producing significant long track tornadoes, even up here into Indiana and Ohio. And the HER does have some evidence of that with these little beans up there by mid-afternoon. So just keep that in mind. We've kind of poo-pooed the setup a little bit and the overall significant long track tornado risk today. But that does not mean that it won't happen. I don't believe that there's going to be a robust prefrontal supercell threat out ahead of the line. But if it does materialize, then we would be able to realize that significant tornado risk today. But the HER certainly is on board that we'll see a kind of devolution of the line into more of a broken band by late morning, early afternoon. And then storms just kind of fill in along that line with a very messy storm mode all the way from Illinois southward into Arkansas and Texas there. More of a very messy storm mode, not a lot of attempts of pre-line convection out here, out across these areas. Pretty quiet out across this corridor, I think, just given that weak forcing. And then we mature into a very robust squall line here going into the evening hours tonight. Would not be surprised to see an upgrade to 45 hatched wind here. Very strong segments in here. Could see a Boeing segment up here across northern portions of the risk area, Illinois into Indiana, according to this model run. So I think significant damaging winds are certainly a possibility here. And then some line-embedded tornadoes as well. I'm just not quite buying the overall significant long-track, high-end violent tornado risk today, given the overall storm mode, and the HRRR certainly seems to support that risk. Areas across Indiana and Ohio later on will get that line to move through as well. Damaging wind risk. Very robust squall line here all the way up from southern Michigan into Ohio, Indiana, southward through the evening hours down into Arkansas and Mississippi and even Texas. So definitely a robust setup regardless of the threat for significant prefrontal development. We will have the threat for robust damaging winds and some embedded tornadoes, no doubt. All right, let's go to the NSSL WRF model. That's the farthest, a little bit farther out right now. So it's got that morning convection pretty well documented there, and you see it just kind of continues the line into the afternoon with not really a ton of. So the NSSL WRF does kind of fire a few prefrontal supercells here, right, just ahead of the line though. So not a ton of real estate for them to work with to become really mature before the line kind of munches them and absorbs them into the line. Now we could see some robust tornadoes happen where any supercells do merge with the line. That is a known interaction that can foster significant tornadogenesis, supercells merging into a line. But you see, they just don't have a ton of real estate out ahead of the line before they go up. They go up, and the line just kind of munches them within a very short amount of time. So, if any supercells do go up ahead of the line, I think that's going to be more of the case. You'll see not a lot of time for them to mature, but overall, fairly robust squall line here up from the Midwest all the way down into the Arklatex region. Significant damaging winds, embedded tornado risk there. Perhaps some strong embedded tornadoes, but your long track significant to violent tornadoes, I think, just on the lower end today compared to what the SPC has outlined. WRF ARW model. That morning convection continues, kind of weakens going into the morning hours, but you see, once again, just not a ton in the way of prefrontal development. We do see some attempts here, at least, out ahead of the line. If any of these can become mature, they would pose the greatest threat for becoming significant tornado producers, but mostly you see that line just kind of fill in going into the afternoon into more of a solid line. Some supercells do tend to fire there by mid to late afternoon, but once again, just right ahead of the line, not much time for them to mature out there across these areas, but if any can, they would propose that significant tornado risk there, and that would be more of the mid to late afternoon, early evening time frame across that high risk area. A lot of these models showing it maybe in the northern portions of that high risk area for sure. And then the squall line just kind of marches off in a very robust fashion going into the evening hours tonight. So that's my take on the overall setup for today. Again, I'm just not buying the overall widespread violent, significant to violent tornado threat today, given some questions about forcing the overall storm mode. But the SPC has seen enough to increase the risk to a high risk, level 5 out of 5, a very rare issuance for them from basically far southern Illinois, the Missouri boot heel, western Kentucky, western Tennessee, into eastern Arkansas. So places like Pine Bluff up to Memphis, Paragould, Jonesboro, Cape Girardeau, far southern Illinois, down into western Kentucky, Mayfield, Paducah, down toward Jackson and Memphis, Tennessee, in that level 5 out of 5 high risk in the pink shading today. Level 4 out of 5 moderate risk should not be taken lightly as well. That red shaded region there, all the way down into northern Louisiana, Little Rock, up toward Bowling Green, Evansville, Louisville, should be on alert there for some perhaps that significant tornado and damaging wind risk, and a large enhanced risk in the orange shaded region there, level 3 out of 5, all the way up into southern Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Chicago, Indianapolis, Columbus, Fort Wayne, Cincinnati, Springfield, St. Louis, down toward Shreveport, Dallas, Fort Worth, Wichita Falls, Abilene, in that level 3 out of 5 risk today. More so a large hail threat with southwest extent down here across Texas and southeast Oklahoma as low-level shear wanes a little bit down there. Up here to the north, though, more so a damaging wind and perhaps tornado risk with more of a line of convection there. Embedded tornadoes are possible, perhaps a strong one or two. And then large marginal and slight risks surrounding that. So a very widespread severe weather outbreak is going to happen today. And the greatest threat for a tornado outbreak is going to focus in the moderate and especially the high risk areas there. So here's just a quick look at all the hazards there. Significant tornado threat extends in the yellow, red, and pink stippled regions. So all the way up from northern Indiana and western Ohio southward through the Mississippi River and Ohio River valleys, focusing in that 30% hatched area. Threat for damaging winds, would not be surprised to see this upgraded to a 45% hatched given the kinematics at play. But significant damaging winds, 60, 70 plus mile an hour winds are possible in the straight line fashion from the squall line, and then large to very large hail with any more discrete supercells. So, I think this line, so the main line that it is ongoing now, may undergo some weakening trend through the morning, but I think by early afternoon or so, we'll start to see this line fill in a little bit, and that's just going to be our main round of storms with this environment. Could we see prefrontal activity? We could. I think it'll have a tendency to be closer to the actual line of storms, and therefore we'll have not as much time to really become mature before producing significant tornadoes. If any storms do fire out ahead of the line, at least well ahead of the line, out here across the the significant risk areas, those would pose the greatest threat for that significant to violent tornado risk that the SPC is highlighting. But I just think that threat is going to be a little bit questionable with today's setup. So those are my thoughts. Once again, the SPC should be your number one source of information here. This is just my opinion on the overall setup. Certainly, though, what is not in doubt is that we have a very potent upper echelon parameter space over a wide region today. So lots of folks are going to experience severe weather, whether that's in the form of significant straight line winds or tornadoes. It's going to be a pretty nasty day for folks out across these shaded regions out there today. So with that, thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.